Hello everybody, FPL Phillips here and welcome back for another video where I'm seeing a lot of people making an FPL mistake heading into game week 3 or something that I'm considering to be a mistake in the overwhelming majority of cases. So that's going to be the topic of today's video. We're going to be discussing the pros and cons of using your wildcard chip and why I think in the majority of cases it is not necessary at all in game week 3. So all that to come, make sure to subscribe if you're new around here. Do leave a thumbs up on the video as well for me, that would really help with the YouTube algorithm and all that good stuff. Turn on the notification bell if you want to, and if you do think you do have a team still worth wildcarding after you've watched this video, then feel free to leave it down below in the comments, and maybe there may be a rare few of you where I might actually recommend it, and we are going to have a wildcard draft at the end of this, just in case you are one of the minority who do actually need the chip activated this week. So without any further ado, let's get into talking some FPL. So before I go in and mention any cons to do with playing the wildcard this week, what are the selling points in the first place? What are the appealing factors of activating your wildcard chip in game week 3? Well, the first thing is more of a psychological one, and it's just that it's fun. Perhaps if you've not played FPL before, the prospect of making loads and loads of transfers in 1 week, if you want to make more than 2, even if you've got 2 free transfers, I want to make 4 changes, oh, I'll just activate the wildcard. Traditionally, I normally only play the wildcard if I'm looking to make at least 5, maybe even at least 6 changes to my side, and that seems to be a rather sensible threshold for making transfers. But a lot of people might be thinking 4's a reasonable number to play the wildcard, right? Especially if you're new to FPL, maybe that's a factor coming in, and it is sometimes hard to see down the line to future game weeks where we might have more info, and you're looking at the short term, getting fun out of the game, which of course is a great thing to do, but it might harm your enjoyment a little bit later on, and sometimes patience really can be rewarded. There are a lot of teams that people are looking to get in as well at the moment. Chelsea and Spurs in particular have really nice fixture swings that happen this game week, from game week 3 onwards. They look rather nice. Players like Jackson, Chilwell if you don't own him, and then plus another third Chelsea asset. People are definitely even looking to triple up this week. The same really can't be said for Spurs, but people are definitely looking at a doggy. Also, maybe Maddison if he does return from injury, but he's kind of more in the con section, which we'll cover in just a moment. But a doggy at Spurs and maybe another Spurs asset could be one to go for. And Manchester City as well, who continue their really nice run of fixtures. We've had a few game weeks kind of watching them now. I know they've made a new signing, but they've still we've seen 90 minutes from Foden. We've seen minutes from Alvarez as well. People are making the decision, as is shown by the transfer stats this week, to bring in these kind of assets and deciding that it's time to maybe load up on Man City, going with 2 other attackers alongside Haaland for their really nice fixtures. And they have Sheffield United this week, which is probably another main thing that people are looking at. One more option is to also change your goalkeeper. I think a lot of managers started the season with Jordan Pickford in goal, which kind of turns out to maybe not been the wisest decision. The Everton defence doesn't look very strong at the moment. And with Chelsea, you have a 4.5 million keeper in Robert Sanchez, who could become an option. I would be wary of that one, with Chelsea signing a new keeper who's been said by Fabrizio is going to compete with Sanchez. So it is one to be wary of. But there are other 4.5 keepers you could go for. Maybe Flecken at Brentford, maybe even Johnston, as long as Dean Henderson maybe doesn't sign for Crystal Palace and offer competition there. I'm kind of leaning into the cons, but getting rid of Pickford is definitely a plus. And with the budget that you get on the wildcard, meaning you can shift funds around anywhere you want to do so, you could even look at upgrading a 4.5 keeper such as Pickford to Ederson without having to worry, because if you're only doing it in 1 free transfer, then unless you've got money in the bank, you're going to have to struggle to make funds meet by downgrading elsewhere in your side. We've also then got the removing any injuries, so people like John Stones and Reece James might still be in your team right now. Maybe you didn't have the chance to remove them in game week 2 or just wanted to roll the transfer into game week 3. Then people might have these injured players hanging around. I think Bullock, Maddison, if you own him, might actually be out for game week 3, so maybe he's worth removing, just even if it's only for 1 week early, you can do that on a wild card. And then we also have the big bracket of players who are in bad form, or players whose expected minutes aren't looking too good at the moment. In terms of bad form, we've got the Arsenal midfielders, people losing a lot of patience with them, Saka giving away his penalties, Martinelli looking like he's playing really wide, and with Nketiah on the pitch, he just doesn't look as strong an FPL option, really, and we don't know how long it's going to go on for with Nketiah in the side. We've also got the Manchester United midfielders, Marcus Rashford playing up front, where he doesn't look really anywhere as good, on the eye test at least, in terms of being an FPL option. Bruno Fernandes, people losing patience with him as well, despite some decent expected data. A lot of it's expected assists as opposed to expected goals. He's had some big chances as well, which he's actually been missing. So people overall are losing patience with these kind of mid-price to high-price Arsenal and Manchester United midfield options. And then we have people who are struggling for expected minutes. So João Pedro, who was benched last game week, Gabriel, if he's still in your team, has now been benched for the first 2 game weeks of the season, actually dropped in price down to 4.9 million. So people losing patience with those kind of options as well, but I don't think it's in overwhelming proportions that people have a lot of these players in their teams. Maybe you have those 4 Arsenal and Manchester United midfielders all together in your side, plus maybe a Gabriel or a Stones or a James in your defence as well, and then maybe João Pedro up front, and you're considering maybe that's enough to play the wild card. Well, here's why it's not. And this is where I'm going to try and convince you to maybe stick patient, stick with a few of your teams, use a free transfer, maybe 2 if you've got those this week, and try and navigate this early period without overreacting, which is probably what I'm going to call it, to some of the early news that we've had and some early scenarios and things that have played out from the first couple of game weeks. So the first point is just it is so early. We have some data, but we do not have a big sample size by any stretch of the imagination. 2 game weeks is not a lot to go on, and there's a reason why traditionally a wild card around the game week 7 or game week 8 mark seems to work rather well. It's because you have 6 or 7 weeks to go on rather than only 2. Stuff can change so quickly. Another incident like a Gabriel being benched unexpectedly could happen. João Pedro could come back in the team and start playing week in, week out for Brighton. We really don't know. And sometimes it is just those extra couple of game weeks that can make all the difference, not only in terms of knowing which personnel are going to be in the team, but also knowing which players are in the best form. And Manchester United could be one of those teams that just struggle with the first few game weeks, but then find their form, just similar to how they did last season, perhaps. And that leads me on to my next point, which is keeping Manchester United assets and keeping Arsenal assets. Even if it means you're wildcarding in game week 4 instead of game week 3, that seems the optimal solution to me, and it seems rather obvious in my head that you'd want to keep your 2 Manchester United assets who are much better at home against one of the weakest defences in the league away from home last season in Nottingham Forest. If there's going to be a game for Manchester United to redeem themselves and try and show to the fans that they are up for this season, then it's going to be this game. And I think Ten Hag is the manager who's not going to be happy with how the first 2 performances have gone, and I think he's going to send his team out to try and make an example of Nottingham Forest. And I think that United, if there's a game where they're going to hit form, this is probably the game to do so before they face Arsenal next week. And speaking of Arsenal, they've got Fulham at home, so another really nice fixture, the weakest defence statistically in the league so far this season, from only 2 games, which again is a small sample size to go on, of course, but it's definitely worth keeping. The likes of Bukayo Saka, I don't think too many are selling him on the wild card anyway, but someone like a Martinelli, you could maybe give 1 more week. I don't think he looks overly impressive, and out of the kind of 4, the 2 Arsenal and the 2 Man United mids, he would probably be the first on my chopping block. But I think it's definitely worth giving him 1 more week and then wildcarding in game week 4 when Manchester United and Arsenal face off against each other. That surely seems a nice point to wildcard. You've got a whole extra week's worth of data, which at this point in the season, when we only had 2 already, you're gaining, 50% of what we already know in just 1 game week's time. So that's definitely my main argument for not going with the wildcard this week. And even if you're unhappy with your team right now, using your 1 free transfer or your 2, I've even seen some people wildcarding with, to try and navigate or even just take a fun punt in game week 3 and then activate the chip in game week 4. An uncertain game time is another reason why to not wildcard as well as to wildcard in the first place. Like I mentioned with João Pedro, like with Gabriel, things can change very suddenly, I should say. The transfer window hasn't even been concluded yet. Teams like Chelsea could go out and buy a new striker. They could go out and sign Osimhen in 24 hours for all we know, and how they've done transfer business in the past. Manchester City, have brought in a new winger Doku who could challenge Alvarez and Foden for minutes. So we don't know how that's going to change things in teams, starting 11s, expected minutes. All this is still yet to be determined because the transfer window hasn't even closed yet. So we don't know which players are going to be nailed in every team. There aren't many players who you can be assured are definitely going to be the ones starting in their sides come the end of the transfer window, especially at some of the big teams who can do business quickly. And the chips value is the next thing that I wanted to lead on to, and that is kind of what I alluded to earlier when I talked about wanting to make at least 5 or 6 changes to your side before considering activating the wildcard chip. Now, we're carrying very advantageous, but personally, if I put together a wildcard team right now, which you're going to see my wildcard team in just a moment, if I were to activate the chip, which I'm for no reason, of course, going to do, then I'm not even that confident that my team that I'm putting together on a wildcard is much better than the team I own at the moment, and that says enough, really. If your team is anywhere similar to how mine looks, or how the majority of the teams on Twitter and the template looks right now, unless you own like Rodri and a load of injured players and defensive midfielders in your side, I see no reason to activate and change 5 or 6 things to players who I'm not even certain are going to outperform the ones I'm taking out. That's what I want to know when I'm using the wildcard, is that I'm very confident my team that I'm getting in is going to outscore the team I've got, and I would be nowhere near confident by making those changes this week. Maybe over the course of a few game weeks' time, it may develop and Chelsea may come into good form. Same thing with Spurs. Udogie might get 3 assists or something like that, but I'm not certain at the moment, and I've not seen enough from the players I'm looking at bringing in on a wildcard to actually be assured that they are better options than the ones I'm removing. We also have unknown injuries at the moment, so James Maddison is really the standout one. If I wanted to go for him on a wild card, which, to be honest, I probably would if he hadn't gotten injured, then I don't know how serious his injury is. He looks like he'll probably be out for game week 3, so why bring him in this week? Wait another week until game week 4, where it looks like, hopefully, because it's a minor injury, he'll be back, and then you can bring him in this week. I know you're missing out on a good fixture for Chelsea against Luton, maybe a good fixture away at Bournemouth for Spurs, but you also have good fixtures in the players you're removing if you're taking out like a Rashford or a Fernandes or an Arsenal asset. I don't think there are too many teams who have really tough games this week that need removing, like 2 big clubs facing off against each other, like we're going to see in game week 4 when Man United take on Arsenal. And then finally, the last thing is I've seen people with 2 free transfers considering using a wild card, and 2 free transfers are very valuable, and if you use the wild card whilst you're on 2, you're kind of burning a transfer, but kind of not really. You're kind of getting 1 less transfer's worth out of the wild card than you would have done, because you may as well have used that transfer before game week 2 if you were going to use the wild card in game week 3 anyway, if that makes sense. So if you have 2 free transfers, you can do a lot with those. Even taking a -4 hit to make 3 moves, I think can sort the overwhelming majority of teams out into a very nice looking state, really, at the moment, and FPL. And yeah, that's what I would recommend. I would definitely recommend 2 free transfers and a -4 over a wild card, and I think that's what we've considered every season gone in FPL. 2 free transfers and a -4, a mini wild card, it seems to be called, really, maybe even a -8, to be honest, does sometimes look better than activating the chip. So if all this has been said and you're still convinced you want to use the wildcard, as mentioned, if you think your team is in that dire strait that you still need one, then make sure to comment it down below and I will give you my thoughts and my opinion on whether you do need to activate the chip. Then here's going to be the team for you. So as mentioned, leave your team down below if you still think your team needs a wildcard this week and you can't just make a free transfer and then do it in game week 4 instead, where it looks perhaps a little bit more optimal. But yeah, we'll move into a wildcard draft anyway. For those of you who are still convinced, this is what I'd be going for with some of the picks that I think are the best moving forward. We've gone with Ederson in goal, with Turner, of course, as the backup. I think with going for Ederson, you kind of just get that assured Man City defensive asset. I was thinking about Diaz or Akanji, or maybe even Walker could be an option. Vardiol as well at 5.0 million, and there's just so many defensive options. I'm not convinced, even with Pep out with his back surgery or whatever's going on, that there's not going to be any rotation anymore. I still think there will be, and with Ederson, you kind of get that assured player. Now Man City are actually keeping clean sheets. He should be less of a troll, and I'd probably be looking to move the funds from a 4.5 mil keeper like Pickford up into Ederson, and allow you to kind of go with a slightly more budget defence across the board. Chilwell and Estupinian are the ones who come in kind of as no-brainers. I think you still play Estupinian through these tough fixtures that he has, but say Brighton really don't perform against Newcastle and have quite a drop-off in their performances, then you can definitely bench for Udogie or Henry or Gusto. These guys have enough strong fixtures as well to kind of cover those game weeks where Brighton perhaps don't have the best game. And they also have lots of attacking threat, which is kind of why I'm going for them. Udogie and that Spurs fixture swing, it looks really nice to capitalise on. Henry has some really nice fixtures as well with Brentford, but again, you can avoid the tough ones like Newcastle away for Brentford by rotating with some other players here, especially as it looks like Gusto's going to be starting for the foreseeable future. There's a small risk that Dizazi or Shalaba could come in and play right back, or a change in system could occur for Poch. But right now, I think he looks like the best third Chelsea asset to own, and I'm just not overthinking it, not thinking I need to leave a slot open for a Chelsea asset like Sterling or someone in midfield, because to be honest, I'm not convinced, and I think there are better picks you can go for in midfield, so I'd be willing to take what it might be a slight gamble and go in for Gusto early this week. Speaking of that midfield where we've not got Sterling, we have got these 5 players instead: Martin Odegaard, Bukayo Saka, Brian Mbeumo, Phil Foden, and then Eze at 6.4 million, who's actually had a price drop. So the reason I've not gone for someone like a Salah is just because I think the Liverpool fixtures are a bit meh at the moment, and with this team you can get a really nice rotation pairing that is a little bit more expensive but still does prove to be a really nice set of fixtures that you get, and one that I've actually already talked about in a previous video. Odegaard and Saka, I suppose by having both of them, you at least know you're probably going to get the Arsenal penalty taker, whoever it ends up being. They both look relatively assured for minutes as well, probably the 2 safest in the Arsenal front 4. And yeah, I really like the look of both of them. Didn't quite want to own Odegaard at the start of the season, but penalties now does actually make it quite a big factor. He has looked like he's continued his form and how impressive he was last season into this campaign. And yeah, I'm thinking he'll be picking up quite a few attacking returns as Arsenal look to charge once again towards a title challenge this year. Mbeumo is pretty much the must-have in this midfield. I think he looks fantastic at the moment, outscoring pretty much every midfielder in the game in a lot of departments. He's had 2 penalties, but even with non-penalty expected goals data and stuff like that, he's like way ahead of most other midfielders that you can buy at the moment. And then Phil Foden comes in, who is probably like my more risky pick in this midfield. Like I said, you've got a rotation pairing with one of the forwards and one of the midfielders. So even if Phil Foden is benched and maybe he doesn't make an appearance from the bench, which even if he is benched looks unlikely, then you have cover on the bench with this side. But Foden, I think, just looks too good. I know he's looked great in the past and somehow unexpectedly he's been benched before. But I think that this is maybe Foden's season. I'm going to take the risk on it again. I might well transfer him in my own personal team anyway, but he'd definitely be in a wildcard for me. And the Sheffield United away fixture and all the other fixtures that come after that as well look so nice that I'd want another Manchester City attacker besides Erling Haaland. And then finally, Eze, who's been so unlucky not to get a return over the first 2 game weeks, not only in game week 1 where he had so many chances and created so many chances as well, but also game week 2 where he arguably should have had a penalty in that Arsenal game that he was the one to go and, almost win himself, I suppose. But Eze at 6.4 million after a price drop seems like really nice value. Might actually be my own transfer in game week 4 anyway. Definitely looking to invest in him in the near future. I'm sure the returns are going to come. Palace are going to have to start putting the ball in the net at some point, and when they do, there's a pretty good chance that Eze is going to be involved as the talisman of that Palace side. And then finally, we'll bring in the man who he rotates with, which is going to be Ollie Watkins. You can kind of see over the first 4 game weeks how that rotation is going to occur. You're going to bench, of course, Watkins in game week 4 when he plays Liverpool. But even all the way up to game week 14, this rotation looks really, really nice. So those are the 2 that you're going to rotate together, and then you're going to be starting the other 4 midfielders plus Haaland and Jackson every week. So as mentioned, we've got that Chelsea triple up in here. He's getting loads of chances at the moment, and although Chelsea are historically a team that do underperform their XG by a small bit, I still think they're going to start scoring some goals. Fixtures breed form, and Chelsea have the fixtures to breed their form and performances, and I think they're going to start doing rather well over the next couple of game weeks. So you're kind of jumping in early on them. I think that's basically the foundation of your wild card, is that Chelsea start hitting form, Spurs hit some relatively decent form as well, and kind of just shifting around the budget to be able to afford something like an expensive rotation. Was it 14.4 million you're spending on rotating 2 players? Isn't something that would usually be an option in FPL, but due to the kind of lack of premiums outside of Erling Haaland, I think it's definitely a thing and a strategy that you can go for this year. So what do you make of my wildcard draft? Let me know down below in the comments. Would you consider going for something like this yourself? How different actually is it to the team that you have at the moment? Because although there are a lot of changes, there's not too much change in overall quality of the squad, in my view. Maybe you could even wildcard to this next week. I don't think there's anything that's suggesting that you couldn't just hold off one more week, and then if something unexpected happens or changes, transfers, anything like that occurs, you've still got a nice squad you could wildcard wildcard to in game weeks to come. In terms of the overall value of this squad, we have got 100.5 million, so there may be a few instances where some of you, if you've had players in your team that haven't gone up, some of the more popularly owned ones, maybe you can't afford this squad. You might have a little bit even left in the bank if you've been doing really well in terms of team value. But if I had to make some changes to the squad, where would I do it? I think there are options where you could just go with a 3-5-2 and just have maybe Archer, who looks like he's going to get his move to Sheffield United, as the third forward and have some more funds to spend in the midfield and the defence. But it would probably just be a case of not going with Edison, to be honest, and having a different goalkeeper instead. Or maybe downgrading Odegaard, going for someone like a Diaby, who I still really like as an option, and then going double Villa attack, or maybe even going with a Brighton midfielder and sticking with one of their boys, March or Matoma, through some of their tougher fixtures. But yeah, that's the case if you don't have the squad value, but I'm hoping that quite a lot of you should at the moment. Maybe not. If you're so desperate that you're looking to play a wildcard this early on, you might not have had the fortune of some of the price rises that the majority of managers have had. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments. Could you be able to afford this draft? Would you go for it if you were wildcarding this week? Which players would you have that are different? And as mentioned, the main thing I want you to comment down below is, are you considering the wildcard? Do you agree with my opinions on why not to? And if you are still convinced that you want to wildcard, tell me your team down below, and I'll try and tell you maybe why you can hold off, which transfers you can do instead, or maybe actually give you the go-ahead and the confidence to actually go ahead and play the chip this week. Thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. Something a little bit different. I'm not just recommending a draft. I'm trying to actually say and talk about strategy and why maybe holding off might be the best thing. I'm basically just saying, no, don't do it. It's the main takeaway from this video, if possible, basically. Thank you very much for tuning in. Make sure to like the video if you did enjoy it or is helpful in any way. Of course, subscribe if you're new around here and turn the notification bell on so you don't miss a video in future. And I hope to catch you all in the next one. Take care and goodbye.